there's a lot of bad actors out there that are selling a lot of snake oil.
Just like there's economic inflation, you have inflation of your own body and your metabolism, and that's called aging.
Just working out or just sleeping doesn't mean it's good or if it's even quality.
There's going to be a double in diabetic occurrences in 20 years if this trend continues.
Hello, and welcome to the third edition of the KiHealth podcast. We're so excited to be here with you all today to talk about health, well-being, optimizing every aspect and getting to root cause care. With us today, I have my co-host, Rob.
Good to see you guys.
And we have a special guest with us today, Dr. Clifford Morris. He is an amazing physician. He focuses in longevity and integrative and functional medicine. And he's really been an incredible resource to us, talking about why we get sick, how to stay healthy. And today we're going to kind of talk about a myriad of things around diagnostics, gut health, where we are going as a society. It's super interesting. Rob actually recently was sharing a statistic with me that kind of blew me away. Rob, what was that stat you were sharing earlier?
Yeah, that's so funny. We were just discussing that before we hopped on. All these fitness companies, all the gyms, they're reporting their quarterly earnings. They're kind of going back and reviewing the last couple of years, and they're seeing a massive reduction in gym attendance. Not 5% or 10%, but upwards to 40% based on the gym. So a lot of people think it was a COVID response at home. People working remote. They bought a Peloton. They're doing the tonal. But even the at-home components have reduced 38%. So if they're not working out at home, they're not working out at the gym, they're just not working out at all. So a lot of people attribute this to the sort of the emergence of GLP-1s, the Ozempics, the semaglutide, the Wegovy's. And I was just shocked by that, because if you see a double-digit reduction in people exercising, which has been known since the dawn of man to be the single most important aspect to longevity, health span, optimal health, metabolic health, the list goes on, staving off disease, hypertrophy and exercise are just such important components. And when you see a 40% of that group just kind of cutting it out entirely, it's a bit shocking.
Well, and I think what happens is, that old adage, and I've heard it more recently, of skinny fat. I would use myself as an example. I've got pretty good genetics. I've been relatively thin my whole life. But does that really mean I've been healthy? And recently I decided, okay, I'm in my 40s. I got to make a little more effort. I got to start exercising. And I began to see significant improvements in the cardiovascular area, specifically in HRV and other factors that I'm tracking. But it became eye-opening to me, because there is a societal shift in the only means of showcasing health is your weight. And the fact of the matter is, weight is not the only factor. There was a study recently released in the UK where they looked at 37,000 people with diabetes, and they tracked them over 8 years. And they showed that only 6% of that population was actually to remain in remission from type 2 diabetes with weight alone. So weight is not the only factor. There are so many other factors to health. And I bring this up because I think, there are a lot of people out there that are probably thinking, well, I'm skinny, I look pretty good, I'm probably healthy. That's not the only thing to consider. And, I love your perspective, Clifford, on metabolic health, on weight, on all the factors that go into being generally healthy.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me here, first of all. Great to be here. We've got a lot to discuss, some really important things and some exciting things, what to do about this, where we're moving forward, what interesting new stuff is coming out that can help us. I think a major problem, this goes back to the whole idea of BMI. BMI has really important prevalence and a place in medicine. It's a quick number that we can understand what is this person's physical shape and what is their size and their weight and what comorbidities and what diseases are usually associated with that. I think that's been a fundamental, really important part of understanding how this obesity has changed in the past 20, 30 years. BMI was a great way for doctors to say, okay, this is when I need to take medical action with this patient and give them a diagnosis based on an actual quantifiable number so that everything is legitimate and standardizable. The consequence of that, 10, 15, 20 years later now, is that we're fixated on this single value. And people say, oh, I used to be 220 pounds, maybe I took a medication, Maybe I actually worked out, like one of the best things we can do for our long-term health. It's very rare these days to try and get that out of people. Try and encourage these, and then they say, okay, now I'm 160 pounds, I'm healthy. And it is just not the truth. In most cases, that could be correlated with better health. The issue is all the underlying issues within our body: metabolism, inflammation, genetics, epigenetics, and then one thing that is really, really huge to me is environmental stressors. Xenoestrogen, xenotoxins, microplastics, stress. Stress from the home to the workplace, stress from politics. Everything in our life right now is extremely intense, and we have to work from the inside out to bolster the strong foundation. We don't know what's coming next year and the year after. We have to put ourselves in the best position metabolically, health-wise, to try and avoid any issues with that.
Clifford, before we move on, because I think you touched on some really important components, and just for the listeners, BMI is body mass index. It's essentially a height to weight ratio. So you're right. In its induction, wildly useful tool. But if you think of a basic metric like height to weight, I would be considered obese on a BMI scale. So it doesn't take into account skeletal tissue mass, let alone all the underlying indications of metabolic health. And you listed a ton, which I think are extremely important. I'd love to even touch on a few of them. But before we do that, you mentioned environmental stressors, right? And I think a lot of people, they think, A, how do we avoid that? B, how do we control it? And C, like, what's the real impact, right? So you've got an exogenous stress. What's happening in the body? Your central nervous system shifts into a fight or flight. People kind of understand that. You're down regulating certain genes. So gene expression is occurring from that epigenetic sort of situation. But what's the real physiological response? Because I think people think, well, how does stress impact weight loss? You know, so if my body's got a finite amount of energy to actually propel all these metabolic functions, all these chemical reactions, but it's being isolated to fixate on stress, then all these metabolic functions are falling to the wayside. So you can sustain adipose tissue or fat. You can downregulate your health as a whole. And I think people, again, understand kind of fight or flight. They understand that there's all these stresses in the environment, but I don't think they really can relate it to like what's happening in my body that's different. If you can kind of elaborate on that.
Yeah, and along those lines, I think it's also important to remember, like, there was a podcast or a video that was recently published of a mom, and she said, everybody tells me I should sleep more, but I got 4 kids, I work full time, like, how do I sleep more? And I think the same is said for stress. Like, you know, people are told all the time, don't be stressed, sleep more. Don't be stressed, sleep more. And in reality, that's a very hard mechanism to control. So what, you know, realistic things would you tell people that they could do within the framework of what exists in their life today?
Yeah, I mean, one of the easiest, cheap, free things you can do is educate yourself. Listen, podcast, read, and try and understand what tools you can use to better yourself. You know, carpenters use the best tools to craft some of the best furniture. Bakers, if they're exquisite bakers, they use the best tools. Why are we not using the best tools out there? Why is our toolbox not having, you know, high-powered sawzalls and drills and impact hammers? You know, a very, very rough analogy, but we're not doing that. The tools are out there. We're developing them quickly. Preventive screening, wearables, early interventions. I'm big on wearables, integrating that data, constantly learning about your body. Otherwise, you're constantly just estimating based on your symptoms. Probably one of the biggest biases that humans have is self-identifying what you think or feel about yourself. It's all these neurotransmitters and stress, and you're constantly looking at yourself. You need something that is external and independent that can tell you what's happening in your body on an inside level, and that is actionable. All of this is a moot point unless we can actually do something about it.
Yeah, objective analysis of real-time data, actionable data. You're right. We're very subjective. We kind of, it's almost sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy a lot of times when we examine our lives, how we feel, how we think. And I think you touched on something so vital, which is screening tools, which is getting real-time data. I think this is something that's kind of lagged a little bit, or we as individuals didn't own this information. We required a third party or an exogenous source to get this information. So I'm glad you kind of jumped to this, because Jen and I believe that early detection diagnostics, screening tools, wearables, stuff where everything from heart rate to HRV to blood pressure, awesome stuff to be getting on a regular basis, tracking your sleep, REM cycles, but then also taking blood-based or serum or cheek swabs to know epigenetic biomarkers and how your body methylates and all these early detection components that are really at the core of staving off disease. So since we kind of made that transition, and because obviously we're big proponents of screening tools, and we think it's foundational to not just preventing disease, but really optimizing your health and living healthy and living long. I mean, have you seen this resurgence or sort of genesis of screening tools now being utilized?
Absolutely. It's you only have to take a look at Amazon and see how much testing is now being sold on there to show you the consumer shift. I'm not telling anybody to buy tests on Amazon, pros and cons, do your own due diligence. There's a lot of great companies out there. The point of that is that the consumer market is shifting. And that obligation is on us. We developed these new tests, amazing screening devices, but pre-analytically, before the lab, nobody knows the tests exist. That's why you have to do things like podcasts and social media and talks and events. You have to educate the public as much as you can of what's available, new tests that can help them learn this new information. And then on the flip side of it, they do the test, that's fantastic. They've made this choice, I'm going to change my life. Well, I'm going to take early action and start investing in my future self so that I can beat inflation, right? Just like there's economic inflation, you have inflation of your own body and your metabolism, and that's called aging. And as you get older, it's harder to keep up with that. It becomes catch up and catch up. We see that specifically in hormones. You touched on a point. When your body is focusing on resources to survive, you basically got two things: fight or flight, which is survive, and then rest and digest, which is a luxury. This is a privilege. This does not get emphasized unless this is complete. A typical example of that is cortisol. You produce a ton of cortisol. It's very high up in your hormone chain, and then it doesn't trickle down to your pregnenolone, your testosterone, everything else. Now, there's very simple tests. You can take a cortisol test at home. How many people actually do that? And so it's about making it easy, accessible, and affordable. We understand the crunches that people are experiencing these days. It's time and money. So having pre-screening tools, having digital applications where it's seamless and affordable is the way that we can really, really encourage people to jump on this. I was looking up, just hardcore facts about diabetes and in terms of what does the future look like. There's going to be a double in diabetic occurrences in 20 years if this trend continues. That's a nice if, because we can do work now and change that trend. And that's the effort that has to get put in. So we're putting in the effort, and then we just have to ask patients, you have to be willing to educate yourself and then make changes. Do something about it, which is huge.
Yeah, I mean, we hear that a lot. What's interesting though is, I joke probably on a regular basis with girlfriends. Instagram is inundated, with wear this ring and you'll sleep like a baby, or buy this test and you'll live 10 years longer. There's a lot of bad actors out there that are selling a lot of snake oil, that are pumping tests that essentially have no beneficial value. If I talk to one more person that takes an allergy test that gives them completely useless results. So for the person out there that's saying, you know what, I can only maybe do one thing right now. I can take one test that's going to help me positively impact my life. What are the key things that you would tell people today? Just focus on this. Keep it simple. What's that one or two things, those one or two biomarkers that are going to be highly impactful to fight the inflation, to fight the aging, and give you a bit of a leg up?
2 or 3, I would say it comes down to obviously inflammation and looking at what is turning over in your body. Our body is a constant build, break down, rebuild. And when those rebuilding and recycling, when the trash guys stop coming on a weekly basis, when your supply chain is messed up and all of that doesn't work together, it ends up spiraling out of control and systems start breaking down, and then one will overcompete because your body will prioritize it. That's deep. That's deep in our genetics and our survivability. You know, you're going to focus on cortisol and just trying to survive, epinephrine, dopamine. Those are great in the short term. Chronically, those are not great for your body in long term.
So if somebody is, just to break it down for the average person, if somebody is potentially dealing with chronic inflammation, what would that show up as? You know, like if somebody walked into your office and you saw them and you looked at them and you said, I'm concerned about your inflammation levels. Is there something to look for? If people are trying to say, like, do I have chronic inflammation?
Yeah, interesting. That's a good one. It's not that obvious. And emphasizes again that we need help. We need tools to do your job correctly and to be consistent. And so that you're taking out that kind of, you know, there's always human contextual and wisdom in medicine. It's what medicine is. It's a knowledge base of hundreds of years. But when you have these quantifiable methods of looking at that unknown. So to answer your question, there's not one single thing that screams out and says, oh, you have inflammation. It's a hidden disease that happens under the skin. The skinny fat conundrum is so true. A lot of people just say, oh yeah, my BMI is great, my lipids were fine, I'm healthy. And they're not looking at some very deep indicators which affect longevity. Inflammation, sleep, turnover, repair. Those are my main themes, right? How are you maintaining this body?
Because there's a normal amount of inflammation too. I think that's the biggest culprit in that is you're right, inflammation, or they even call inflammaging, right? Inflammation could literally be that source of aging. So then you say, okay, well, let's just detect the inflammation. So you see, CRP and oxidative stress. You start to get some of these inflammation biomarkers. But then how do you detect the difference or the increase, right? If you go hit the gym, you're creating inflammation. When you get in the sauna or you do any hormetic stress, hormesis, you're causing an inflammatory response. But that's a healthy inflammation. So I think where those will be the future in terms of getting out in front of chronic illness with chronic inflammation, it's still missing a giant threshold in terms of interpreting sort of normal or useful or effective inflammation from the chronic or the damaging components. So I completely agree. You start to look at, you said cellular turnover. I mean, we are turning over cells on a regular basis. We have oftentimes senescent cells or zombie cells that will bounce around and bind together and cause problems and wreak havoc. So people start to throw around like autophagy or apoptosis, which is sort of the regular cellular turnover. But then you start to get a test that picks up senescence and you go, well, is this like the normal amount of senescence or a high amount or low amount? Yeah. So I still think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the quantifying it, the interpretation. But I think the verdict is out on inflammaging and inflammation being such a key component, which is why I'm glad you started there, because there are actionable things that you can do to reduce overall body inflammation in terms of consuming antioxidant-rich foods and getting rid of free radicals and exercise. We can talk about all those.
I would argue that it's probably one of the most actionable things that you can do in your body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the freest too. I mean, because you can do things via exercise, breath work, grounding. I mean, there's so many things you can do, and it doesn't cost you a dime to actually reduce full body inflammation.
Well, and supplementation, and I had a feeling you would say it's not easy to spot. And, I asked that question because I think there's a lot of people out there that, maybe haven't thought for a moment, like, are you truly healthy? Are you optimizing your body for longevity? Are you optimizing your body to stave off, Alzheimer's, dementia, so you have your mental capacity and mental function into your 90s? That's a key factor for me. I mean, most of the decisions I make are to sustain my mental function for as long as I possibly can. So I encourage people to think about, when was the last time you did a test to determine your inflammatory levels? It's something that we should be doing on a very least on an annual basis to see if something pops, to
If
see if
ever.
something has changed. Yeah.
Who's ever done an inflammation test?
Yeah, I mean, because they're hard to get, and I always
Where
say
do you
this.
buy it? How much is it? I don't know. What am I going to do with the results?
Yeah,
is there a
what's
doctor?
actionable,
I don't know
right?
what these 5 letters on a report mean. What is this? It means nothing to me.
We haven't created a means to make it simple, and it shouldn't be hard. If this is one of the 3 that we talk about, one of the 3 cornerstones to health and longevity, it should be accessible, it should be understandable, it should be simple to track. And that is why it is one of the key areas that we focused on, because to your point, you're right. If I wanted to know how I was doing from an inflammation perspective, where would I go? And if I asked my primary care doctor, and it's no knock on them, it's not their fault. They're not set up to succeed in this area. They wouldn't know what test to run for me or even what direction.
Well,
to
what do you
take me
bill
in.
for inflammation?
Yeah.
There's also that, which maybe is another podcast, or
Yeah, we could probably do a whole one on that.
We have to ask ourselves. A lot of these tools have artificial barriers to everyone. When it's a pragmatic barrier, it really beats me up. It kills me. Like low income communities, the tribal lands, they are so cut off because of these barriers that are put in that are usually pragmatic and can be solved with one of 2 things, either money or effort. It's not technological, and it's not a scientific issue that we cannot test for it. There's incredible inflammation tests out there, and we can talk about that, and we can talk about which markers work together. I think one of the most important things here is, as you mentioned, what to do about it and what does the marker mean for, say, a physician or practitioner. And that's where the whole concept of machine learning comes in and learning from the data. And you can throw a lot of terms out there. Everyone says artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is decision making. Machine learning is understanding data. And that's the big thing with the screening data. Is you're looking at thousands of patients, 37,000 patients earlier, you said in the UK over 8 years. That is the information we need so that we can understand which markers actually impact your health span, which is arguably what this is all working toward. Increasing the years that I live healthily.
Yeah, I was going to say, with a high quality of life.
Correct.
And that's what I talk to people about is it's not about living. In fact, we coined a term in an earlier life where it's not about aging gracefully, it's about aging gratefully. It's about waking up every day and feeling happy that I'm here and enjoying what I'm doing. Life should be good. Like I tell people, I was at a event recently, and a friend of mine, beautiful young woman in her late 20s, and after having 2 kids, she is continually bloated, like every single day. And she's gone to doctor after doctor, and they tell her, oh, we'll just give you another medication. You're fine. It's all in your head. They basically have turned this into a her issue, not a health issue. And that happens to women a lot, where they're not listened to, they're not understood, they're not heard. She should not feel bad at 28. She should not feel lethargic and bloated. Something is wrong.
You shouldn't feel bad at 68.
Yeah. I mean, you shouldn't feel bad. We should
We
wake
have
up
the
and
tools
feel good. And
Yeah.
I feel like as a society, we've gotten complacent with feeling okay, not desiring to feel great.
Yeah, we've normalized it.
We've normalized
The
it.
status quo has, the bar has dropped, literally. And people say, oh, it's okay to be that. Apathy is our biggest competitor for a healthy society. It's easier to just, go back and retreat and just do the lifestyle you were at. And then everybody's overworked. Now, you can deal with overworking in 2 ways. Some people are fortunate, they might have privilege, money, and they can deal with it. They can go see a therapist. They can go to a meditation retreat on the weekend. Amazing. Those are all really great for our mental and physical health. That's not the reality out there for 99% of Americans. So how do we get them to do this in their home? How do we get them to engage on a simple level, like doing free Pilates at your house where all you need is a yoga mat or something? It's the same concept. It's education and delivering it in a in an appetizer instead of this whole full course where people have to commit to an entire meal. We can do this in stepwise process, but it has to start early.
I also think you have to feel good enough to want to do Pilates. So I think,
Yeah.
I mean, I genuinely mean that, because I think there's a lot out there that are like, just go walk every day or just get out of bed. And if you barely have enough energy to feed your children, if you have kids, or do your job, and your tank is empty at the end of the day, Pilates,
clinical depression.
yeah, Pilates is off the table. And, it brings me to, I love your perspective on the importance of gut health, because there's been a lot of studies out there, and you just touched on mental health, where people are starting to uncover the multifactorial aspects of gut health. The fact that it may not just impact your gut, but it may impact your inflammatory levels. It may impact your mental health. There was a study recently published out of Australia that showcased gut health's link to Alzheimer's and dementia. It's becoming this thing that, it's unraveling to be much more than we ever thought it was. And I'd love to kind of get your perspective, and obviously Rob's as well, on what does that mean to the average person? Like, should we be thinking about our gut in a different way?
Before Cliff jumps on that, because Jen, I think you made a really good point, because you mentioned quality of life, but you also made that metaphor about the woman that's got 4 kids, and they say, "Oh, you got to sleep more. You got to sleep more." It's not about sleeping more; it's getting better quality sleep, and that ties into the screening tools. It ties into everything. It's not about whether you take a test or not. Is it a quality test? It's just about food. Somebody says, "Hey, I got 30 grams of protein." Is it from hot dogs or grass-fed beef? It's the quality of the nutrients, quality of your sleep, quality of your time. So we get into this, and where you guys were discussing so eloquently about screening tools and the right type of biomarkers, the quality component has to get factored in. You're not just alive and that's a good thing, or you lived long and that's a good thing. If you're miserable, or if you're disease-ridden, or you're riddled with comorbidities, it's really the quality of life.
Yeah.
And that's going to feed into the quality of your daily programming, the quality of the screening tools that you're utilizing. And because there's a minutia, right? You mentioned Amazon, there's a ton. So it's really zeroing in on the quality components so that you're getting a better output. And I think we have an abundance of wearables and data points. Nobody's utilizing any of them because they don't know how to.
And they don't give you data that's actionable.
Yeah.
It's just pinging data points. But okay, now what do I actually do about it?
And they're
There's
marketing to a
great
consumer that says, "Hey, you're going to get these 17 things." They're like, "That sounds cool," but they don't really know.
We still have to detach the consumerism from science and medicine. They exist together, of course, naturally. But we have to be sure that you're saying, okay, this is used just for health and wellness, or just keeping a track of yourself or exercise, and this is actually going to affect your longevity and how long you live.
Yeah, and I think that was the genesis of KiHealth. This podcast is to fill that gap, right? There's an abundance of screening tools, which are good, which are important, which are actually going to give me information that's useful. There's all these wearables. We're getting access to data. What do I do with it? How does this kind of fold into my daily routine? And we can get into how the Apple Watch or the Oura Ring or some of these things can actually sort of impact your health. And we can talk about HRV. We can talk about using grounding. There's so many cool things that you can do to impact your daily health. I just want to jump on that because I've had people tell me all the time, "Rob, I'm working out for an hour." I'm like, what's the quality of your workout routine?
Sitting on their phone for half of their time.
Yeah. I mean, it's what's your time under tension? Are you actually stressing skeletal tissue? Like, are we creating microfissures? Are you actually getting a good outcome? Because just working out or just sleeping doesn't mean it's good or if it's even quality. Candidly, I know people that sleep 8 to 10 hours and it's worse quality than somebody that sleeps 3. So I think that's a key component. We'll kind of hit on it as we go through a lot of these series to really touch on quality nutrition, quality exercise, and modality sort of instructions so that you're getting better output. And candidly, you're getting a better bang for your buck. You don't have to sit in the gym for 90 minutes. You don't have to spend all day in a kit. You can find the right way to do things, the right screening tools, the right way to analyze data so that it's actionable and tangible. But I thought that was a good tie-in to gut health, especially because you mentioned inflammation is such a key biomarker. You mentioned neurodegenerative disease. You mentioned cognition and mental faculties being your primary reason for optimizing and investing your health. It's the same with me. So neurodegenerative disease, Alzheimer's, frontal lobe dementia, inflammation. It's an inflammatory response. Your brain protects itself But where's that inflammation come from? We talk about root cause care. So is that a inflammatory response from gut dysbiosis or C. difficile or small
Was it a
intestinal,
virus you
or
caught and
a viral
activated
load?
the consequence that we're seeing,
Yeah.
those cascades
So
of
let's go even a
Alzheimer's?
step beyond or before, I guess, the inflammation component and talk about gut, the role that it plays in the body as a whole, how the microbiome, but then also that gut-brain axis and how key it is to just overall health.
Yeah, that gut-brain axis, it's huge. There are links between these diseases we're seeing between the gut, your peripheral neurotransmitters that are made within the gut. They're very different to the ones that are made in your brain within the blood-brain barrier. You know, those neurotransmitters don't really go in and out, but they metabolize and they interact through your vagus nerves and other peripheral nerves. Very, very important. So our gut starts off as, it's a lining, it's double walled, and it has all these protection in it. It's got, it secretes lots of good stuff that keeps your lining, and then it's coated by, billions of bacterial cells, right? Our organism within us. We are a living organism within a living organism. And the whole point of the gut is, we take in food and we eat it, we turn that into energy that will then hopefully be used to repair things in our body under normal circumstances. However, in these days, we are so exposed to so many problems, environmental stresses. Our guts are taking an absolute beating, and we haven't had enough time for our gut to evolve and learn this. It takes multi-generations to adapt to dietary changes. You see it in especially Asian population. They move to America and all this new fried, kind of food,
Processed,
they get this
packaged, yeah.
metabolic syndrome and they're sick for years until they start tolerating these differences in gluten, ingredients, preservatives.
And a lot of that is they don't have the digestive enzymes. So when you've created a sort of a gut ecosystem, you have the enzymes to break down each bit of food that comes in the system.
Highly
So
specialized.
when you change and then you go halfway around the world, all of a sudden you're being exposed to things your body doesn't have the enzymatic environment to even break it down. So what do you have? Your gut says, we don't know what to do with this stuff. So it hangs around and it wreaks havoc. That's such a great point.
And then the autoimmune kicks in, it starts attacking itself.
And then you have an inflammatory response and you can
So
kind of go
yeah,
down
we
that.
can take this as kind of a case study, right? Somebody comes across and they move here. Let's say they're 45 years old and you're kind of in that susceptible zone, maybe a premenopausal woman about to go through one of the most significant changes in her life that's going to determine the next 40 years of her life, right? The quality of that life. We have to be able to address that. So this person moves across, the gut gets wrecked, and what happens is you get leaky gut syndrome where the bacteria leave and they have this very thin layer and they're not able to protect. Compounded with that, the population of these different bacteria change. You're supposed to have a few different, up to 5, sometimes 10 different bacteria that grow in your system at different rates and different amounts. That all affects each other, and then one population will take over. Now all of a sudden those enzymes to digest, let's say milk or gluten or something else,
casein,
aren't present.
Yeah.
What does your body do with that? It now treats those substances as foreign.
And attacks them.
And it attacks them.
Yeah.
You do that over and over again, it becomes a learned response. And that's how you develop these autoimmune style diseases that we see in the gut.
You've created an adaptation that you don't want.
That you don't want,
Yeah.
a negative one. Now, traditionally, those people would die off and, kind of the population goes over and over. That was 100,000 years ago, 50, 20,000 modern humans. Now we have all these things allowing us to band-aid these things, and now we're living longer, but not healthier. And so why is the incidence of Alzheimer's disease going high? One, because it's directly an age-related disease. The only thing we know right now about Alzheimer's is it's caused by age or associated with age, right? And then you got the ApoE genes that interact with that. So we're living longer and at higher risk of Alzheimer's, and we're not preparing our body to deal with it, to recycle those proteins, to deal with those autoimmune responses. And it's not like they just go in these waves. What happens is they accumulate. Yeah. It's this wave comes from a bottom and goes up, but it doesn't go back to where it was before. it might go back halfway, 20%. Every time you're stacking like a marginal tax rate, it's going up and up and up and up. And the final consequence of all of this is your gut does not function. It allows things in that shouldn't be, and you're not producing very important things in your gut. Your gut is responsible for vitamin D regulation and metabolism. Estrogen metabolism, 90% of your estrogens are recycled in your gut.
Can we pause for a second?
yeah.
Because I think that's a really, really important point. Nobody thinks gut hormones. I don't think the average person has any idea that they're so interlinked. What you just said, 90% of estrogen is processed in the gut. For a woman to feel good, how we regulate estrogen is absolutely crucial. So if our gut isn't functioning effectively, we're not regulating our hormones effectively.
Well, you're 100% right.
And I think people don't even show that connection, which is crazy.
And we've had these discussions about your hormones or your personality. Your hormones dictate everything: your energy levels, your optimism, your confidence,
especially testosterone and estrogen.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So if you've got a mild reduction or suppression because of gut issues, your entire life changes. It's not just a little bit of lethargy. And then you mentioned vitamin D too. I mean, the only vitamin we create in the body, a vitamin vital for metabolic processes and immune system regulation. So it's happening in the gut. I don't think people, as Jen mentioned, are probably aware of that.
No. And then, believe it or not, most of your neurotransmitters are made in your gut.
Yeah.
By bacteria in your gut and are synthesized and recycled around there. Because everyone thinks serotonin, that makes me feel good. Yeah, it does. It's a mood regulator in your brain. It binds to specific receptors that elicit a positive response in our brain. Dopamine is more exciting, right? Rewarding, intense. Those are all within our brain. What people sometimes aren't aware of is that serotonin functions to do the rest and digest part of our gut and our system. So if you dopamine all day, just stress, anxiety, your gut's producing dopamine, it's contributing to the inflammation. You're absorbing things that you shouldn't. You're having these immune responses and your serotonin is low. It's peripheral nervous system dysfunction, and you lose balance between your parasympathetic nervous system and your sympathetic nervous system. And ultimately, what we are seeing are correlations between cognitive diseases and disorders, your gut microbiome, and the neurotransmitters that are made within there. It's a little bit two-step, and there's some cascades in there, but autism, very obvious. Parkinson's, that's dopamine, acetylcholine, there's a lot of research going in that. And then Alzheimer's. With Alzheimer's, it's more of a response that is linked to the gut in an inflammatory capability. And then we also see some other diseases out there. I mean, diabetes in the pancreas, it's so obvious. I mean, diabetes is sometimes related as Alzheimer's of the pancreas or insulin version of Alzheimer's. And that's because they all fundamentally driven and triggered by inflammation and then the lack of your body to keep up with it. If we remove
I want to touch on the metabolic stuff, but I don't want to jump away from the central nervous system one, because I think there's a big connection here that most people don't really connect with, in the sense that we've been conditioned to think that everything's separate, right? You go to a brain doctor, you go to a foot doctor, there's different parts of the body, and there's very limited overlap or interaction. But you talked about the gut and the central nervous system. And I want you to kind of touch a little bit stronger on why this is important. I read a phenomenal study years ago, and they basically had one group sit and eat a meal in a peaceful, tranquil environment. So it was trying to set their central nervous system, control certain brainwave states, and then they measured the level of absorption, how the body was synthesizing, breaking down these nutrients. Identical meals. They had a separate group eat that meal while driving to work or driving back from work. So they're in traffic, right?
Driving to the in-laws.
So they're in traffic, but their central nervous system is wired for survival. They're in fight or flight. If they mess up or turn the wheel, they die. So what was wild was it's the same meal, aesthetically the same groups of people, but the results in terms of how their body utilized those nutrients was dramatically different. The group that was driving didn't absorb or synthesize or break down the food almost at all.
Correct.
Because their body's not like, we can sit here and rest and enjoy a meal. It's
pumping out cortisol,
Yeah.
and then your body is seeing that food as a survival technique, and so all it's going to do is convert that into glycolysis and straight into adipose tissue, because fat gives you the biggest chance of surviving.
Yeah.
There might not be more food, so your body converts it under stressful situations to the stuff we don't want.
And that was the biggest component.
The positive nutrients going to our brain, feeding, restoring the
because
gut.
Your ancestral brain thinks, okay, we require active glycogen, like we need glycogen. So how it broke down sugar was tremendously different.
Yes.
And the reason why I make that example is because I don't think people think their thoughts when they're eating or what they're doing when they're eating, or some of these basic components are playing a massive role in how we break down sugar, how we metabolize food, that connection between the central nervous system and the gut. Because a lot of times, these are the things that will dictate things. There was a great, I can't remember the physician's name, but he was like, I get it, if you're eating gluten-free and organic, but you're in a state of fear, you're eating organic fear. You're eating gluten-free fear.
I like
so
that.
a lot of it was that if you were wired in your central nervous system to be in stress or to be in survival, your body does not see that food or this moment in time to break down, absorb, and utilize it effectively. It's utilizing it for survival, which causes an insulin spike, which causes a far different response.
And let's make sure that everyone's clear what stress is. Stress isn't, oh, I've got this to do by the end of the day. Stress comes in many forms. It's physical, it's emotional, it's mental, it's spiritual, it's everything. It's environmental, it's toxin. Stress is a ubiquitous term for the fight that we do every day. And the more prepared you are for that fight, the more armor you have on, the more convoys that you have ready to repair, because you're assuming how this recycling works and why it's so critical is they've done a ton of studies on mice, unfortunately, that they removed the gene that causes or makes the protein that causes plaques of Alzheimer's disease, beta amyloid. This plaque is produced by the brain, and then something happens, which we still haven't elucidated yet, that activates it. This protein misfolds and basically sticks to each other, forms like a Velcro ball, and that's what causes the death of the brain cells in your brain associated with Alzheimer's. They removed that protein, right? We would think, okay, this protein is bad, causes Alzheimer's. Let's get rid of it. Let's do some mice studies, cut out that gene. The mice died. That protein is critical to neurofunction. Yeah. It's when it becomes unrecycled and then we can't keep up with it. Now, in a normal case, your body can deal with that. What are some of the things that trigger your body to not be able to deal with it? Well, it's genetics, early onset. And then oftentimes it can be another trigger, chronic inflammation, a disease, viral diseases. We're going to see a lot from COVID activating a lot of Parkinson-style Alzheimer's, your tau protein-related diseases. And then ultimately we're seeing this here as a relation between the gut and brain. And the gut is more than just your stomach and your intestines and your lining. There's a pancreas in there. You've
and that's what I wanted you to touch on, because that's
arguably the next
wheelhouse.
Yeah.
Is metabolic function, the pancreas,
it's huge.
The role that glucose and insulin play. I want you to talk a little bit about beta cells too, because I think this is something that is kind of at the tip of the spear. It's cutting edge. There's been such an investment in metabolic health and curbing diabetes. You mentioned diabetes or even Alzheimer's being type 3 diabetes, metabolic disease being the underpinnings of almost all chronic disease. You see it in heart disease, cardiovascular disease. So if the kind of starting point is beta cells, kind of educate our audience a little bit on why they should start thinking about beta cells or beta cell death or beta cell dysfunction. If it's that earliest indication, shouldn't people know more about it? Shouldn't they find a way or know a way to be able to track it or measure it, or even certain modalities and things to preserve it?
Yeah. The pancreas, I think, has been kind of the ignored, sibling in the situation, and it's been exclusively associated with diabetics, which is just not true. Everybody has a pancreas. It works on all of us. It's just we're so fixated on the fact that pancreas, insulin, diabetes, which is great that people are paying attention to that. They're paying more attention to insulin resistance that is caused by lots of sugar in your type 2 diabetics. this dietary issue that it's long-term and we're being exposed to. So in the same sense, your pancreas is kind of like your brain or your gut. It's constantly battling in this repair, regenerate. And it has a very important function. It has these things called beta cells, which reside in the pancreas in these islets. And these beta cells are basically your entire insulin and glucose regulators. They are the marshals of how you take sugar in, how you metabolize it, and what you do with it. Now, when you're overexposed to sugar, or let's say you're type 1 diabetic and you have this genetic alteration that makes these beta cells dysfunction. And usually in type 2, it's a result of insulin resistance. They try and keep up with all the sugar.
Which would be an overexposure to sugar.
Overexposure, sugar, lipids. Who knows what else is actually activating these beta cells? I think that's where we all have a lot of work. Sure. Is it just sugar? I think there's more to it.
Yeah. I think the polyunsaturated fats, a lot of the PUFAs and the seed oils are also triggering that. But yeah.
Absolutely huge. And then ultimately they lose control over that process. Same as in Alzheimer's. The garbage guys, they can't clean up this anymore. We're working. There's only so much that can be done with your body, especially when you have resource prioritization. There's not unlimited resources. We can't just print another $1 trillion in the body. It has to come from somewhere. Then you're not eating well. Mm-hmm. You're not absorbing this food. It's a snow. It just keeps compounding in itself.
Well, we see that cycle across the board from what you've talked about, where it's just simply your body can't keep up with what's coming in that's negative that has to be disposed of because you're not putting enough healthy nutrients, and you're not also supporting it with sleep and reduction of stress and a multitude of factors. I feel like we could speak for probably another few hours. And Clifford, we're definitely going to have you back because I think that there are two almost podcasts unto themselves. One, I'd love to hear more when we bring you back around, autism, mental health, ADHD, and it's linked to the gut because I think it's running rampant. And I think as a society, we could be missing something there. And you've keyed in on some really interesting points. And I'd love for you to come back and talk to us a little bit more about, why beta cells matter. For those that are not at risk necessarily for type 2 diabetes, why should I care about my metabolic health? What else does it potentially regulate that could be impactful? I know we're out of time today, but those are two that we will definitely have you back for. And if you're as interested in learning about those things and others from Clifford and a multitude of other experts we will have on the podcast, subscribe, click the link below in the comments, follow us to learn more. We're really passionate, as you can see, about, arming people with the knowledge, information, education that they need to optimize their lives. So stay tuned for more, and thank you for joining us today.